Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I'll be digging through the depths of Reddit again, finding stories that are so unbelievable you'll question if they're even real. But that's the thing about the internet. Sometimes, truth really is stranger than fiction. So grab your favourite late night snack, get comfortable, and let's explore some stories that'll make you grateful for whatever drama you're dealing with in your own life. Let's start with our first story, which comes from someone who thought their proposal was going to be the perfect romantic moment. They were wrong. My brother stole my wedding proposal. I'm 26 and my boyfriend Alex is 28. We've been together for 4 years and I knew he was planning to propose soon because he'd been acting nervous and secretive for weeks. He kept asking weird questions about my schedule and whether I'd be free certain weekends. It was adorable how bad he was at hiding it. Last Saturday, we went to my parents' house for what I thought was just a regular family dinner. My mum had made my favourite lasagna, and everyone was there. My parents, my brother Kevin, who's 24, his girlfriend Lisa, and my sister Rachel with her husband. The conversation was flowing, everyone was laughing, and I kept catching Alex giving my dad these meaningful looks. After dinner, Alex suggested we all go out to the backyard. My parents have this beautiful garden with string lights, and my mum's prize-winning rose bushes. It's where my parents got engaged 30 years ago, so I knew this was it. My heart was pounding as we all walked outside. Alex took my hand and started this beautiful speech about how much I meant to him, how he couldn't imagine his life without me. Everyone was smiling, and my mum was already tearing up. He got down on one knee and pulled out this gorgeous vintage ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I was already crying happy tears when he said the words I'd been waiting to hear, but right as Alex opened the ring box and said, "Will you marry me?" my brother Kevin suddenly jumped up from where he'd been sitting and yelled, "Actually, we have an announcement too." Everyone turned to look at Kevin, including me and Alex. Alex was still on one knee, ring box open, waiting for my answer. Kevin grabbed Lisa's hand and pulled her up next to him. "Lisa and I are engaged," he shouted, pulling out a ring and sliding it onto her finger. "I proposed this morning at the beach." The entire backyard went silent except for Lisa, squealing with excitement. My mum immediately rushed over to congratulate Kevin and Lisa, completely abandoning me and Alex. My dad followed, then Rachel. Within seconds, everyone was crowding around Kevin and Lisa, asking to see her ring, asking about wedding plans, completely ignoring the fact that Alex was still kneeling in front of me with an open ring box. I looked down at Alex, and he looked as stunned as I felt. He slowly stood up and closed the ring box, slipping it back into his pocket. I wanted to scream at Kevin, to tell everyone that Alex had been trying to propose first, but I didn't want to cause a scene at what was supposed to be my moment. Kevin knew exactly what he was doing. Earlier that day, when Alex had pulled my dad aside to ask for permission, Kevin had overheard the entire conversation. He knew Alex was planning to propose that evening. He knew, and he deliberately waited until the exact moment Alex popped the question to steal the spotlight. The rest of the evening was all about Kevin and Lisa. My parents kept asking about their wedding plans, their timeline, whether they'd already looked at venues. Alex and I sat there like ghosts at our own family gathering. When we tried to leave early, my mum barely acknowledged us because she was too busy planning an engagement party for Kevin and Lisa. In the car, Alex apologised over and over. He said he'd never imagined Kevin would do something so selfish. He'd spent months planning this moment, coordinating with my parents, making sure everything would be perfect. He'd even arranged for my mum to have her camera ready to capture the moment. 2 days later, Alex tried again. He took me to the restaurant where we had our first date, got down on one knee in front of the same table where we'd shared our first meal together. This time, there were no interruptions. I said yes, obviously, and the ring was even more beautiful than I'd remembered. But when we told my family, the excitement was muted. My parents had already used up all their engagement enthusiasm on Kevin and Lisa. They seemed happy for us, but it felt obligatory. My mum kept comparing our engagement to Kevin's, asking why we hadn't done something more creative like proposing on the beach. The worst part was Kevin acting like nothing had happened. When I confronted him about interrupting Alex's proposal, he claimed it was just coincidence. He said they'd been planning to announce their engagement that night anyway, and hadn't realised Alex was also proposing. But I know my brother, and I know he did it on purpose. Kevin has always been competitive with me. When I got accepted to college, he suddenly decided he wanted to apply to the same school. When I got my first real job, he started applying to companies in the same industry. When I started dating Alex, Kevin suddenly became interested in settling down with Lisa after years of saying he wasn't ready for commitment. Now, Kevin and Lisa are planning this elaborate wedding for next spring, and they keep hinting that Alex and I should wait until after their wedding to get married, so we don't steal their thunder. The irony is not lost on me. Alex has been incredibly understanding about the whole situation, but I can tell he's hurt. He put so much thought and effort into making that proposal special, and Kevin ruined it with his selfishness. Every time someone asks about our engagement story, I have to decide whether to tell the truth about what really happened or just give them the sanitized version about the restaurant proposal. I love my brother, but I'm struggling to forgive him for taking something so important and making it about himself. Some moments can't be recreated, and he stole something from us that we can never get back. That story is over. The sheer selfishness of interrupting someone's proposal just to steal their moment is breathtaking. Some people really can't stand to let others have their shine, even for 5 minutes. Family dynamics can bring out the absolute worst in people. Our next story takes us into the world of family secrets that can completely reshape everything you thought you knew about your life. I found out my dad has a second family. I'm 31 years old, and I thought I knew everything about my father. He's always been a dedicated family man, never missed a school event, coached my little league team, the works. My parents have been married for 35 years and seem to have the kind of relationship everyone envies. Last Christmas, my wife bought me one of those DNA ancestry kits as a joke. She thought it would be fun to see where my family originally came from. I spit in the tube, mailed it off, and forgot about it for months. When the results came back in March, most of it was what I expected. Mostly Irish and German heritage, some Scandinavian mixed in. But there was a section that showed potential relatives, and that's where things got weird. The system had matched me with someone listed as a potential half-sister named Courtney. She lived about 2 hours away from me, in a city where I didn't know we had any family. I figured it was probably a mistake, or maybe some distant cousin the algorithm had miscategorized. But curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on Courtney's profile and saw that she was 28 years old. The math was unsettling. If she really was my half-sister, that would mean she was born when my parents were already married, and I was 3 years old. I sent Courtney a message explaining that the DNA site had matched us as potential siblings and asking if she knew anything about our possible connection. She responded within hours, and what she told me turned my world upside down. Courtney said she'd always known she had a half-brother, but had never been able to find me. Her mother had told her that her father was a married man named Michael, who lived in my city. She'd been looking for me for years, but only knew my dad's first name and general location. My dad's name is Michael. Courtney sent me pictures of herself, and I immediately saw the resemblance. We have the same eyes, the same stubborn cowlick that never lies flat, the same crooked smile. She looked like she could be my sister. She also sent me a picture of her birth certificate. Under father's name, it listed Michael Thompson. That's my dad's name. I felt sick. I drove to Courtney's city that weekend, telling my wife I was visiting an old college friend. When I met Courtney in person, there was no denying the family resemblance. She looked like a female version of me. Courtney told me her story. Her mother, Patricia, had worked as a receptionist at the insurance company, where my dad was a regional manager in the late 1990s. They'd had an affair that lasted almost 2 years. When Patricia got pregnant, my dad promised he would leave my mother and marry her. Instead, my dad got transferred to a different branch and cut off all contact with Patricia. He never met Courtney, never paid child support, never acknowledged her existence. Patricia raised Courtney as a single mother, working multiple jobs to make ends meet. Courtney said Patricia had always spoken fondly of my dad despite everything. She told Courtney that my dad was a good man who'd been trapped in a difficult situation, that he'd probably wanted to be part of her life but couldn't figure out how to make it work. I didn't know what to do with this information. My dad, the man I'd looked up to my entire life, had abandoned a child. He'd let a woman struggle to raise his daughter alone while he played happy family with us. When I got home, I couldn't look at my dad the same way. Every family dinner felt like a lie. When he'd talk about integrity and responsibility, all I could think about was Courtney growing up without a father, because he'd chosen to pretend she didn't exist. I wrestled with whether to confront him for weeks. Part of me hoped there was some explanation, some reason this wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the DNA results were conclusive, and Courtney's story was too detailed to be fabricated. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to my dad's house when my mum was at her book club and showed him the DNA results. His face went completely white when he saw Courtney's name. "You know her," I said. It wasn't a question. My dad sat down heavily in his recliner and buried his face in his hands. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then he started talking, and everything came pouring out. He admitted to the affair with Patricia. He said it had started during a rough patch in his marriage to my mum when they were having problems conceiving a second child. He'd felt trapped, and Patricia had made him feel young and free again. When Patricia got pregnant, my dad had panicked. He said he'd wanted to do the right thing, but he couldn't bear the thought of destroying his family. My mum had just found out she was pregnant with my sister, and he couldn't imagine leaving her to raise 2 children alone. So he'd made the cowardly choice to disappear from Patricia's life entirely. He'd requested the transfer to avoid seeing her every day, and he'd convinced himself that she and the baby would be better off without him complicating their lives. "I've regretted it every day for 30 years, he said, but by the time I realised how wrong I was, too much time had passed. I didn't know how to reach out without making everything worse. I asked if my mum knew. He said she'd suspected something during that period, but had never confronted him directly. When he'd gotten the transfer and things improved between them, they'd both chosen to move forward without discussing it. My dad begged me not to tell my mum or my sister. He said it would destroy the family and hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. He promised he would reach out to Courtney and try to make amends, but he asked me to give him time to figure out how to do it without destroying everything else. I left that conversation feeling like I didn't know my father at all. The man who taught me about honour and responsibility had abandoned his own child for 30 years. The stable family life I'd grown up taking for granted had been built on a lie. It's been 6 months since I found out about Courtney. My dad has started sending her money, and they've talked on the phone a few times, but he still hasn't told my mum or my sister. Courtney wants to meet them, to be part of the family she never had, but my dad keeps saying it's not the right time. I'm caught in the middle, keeping a secret that gets heavier every day. Every family gathering feels like a performance. I've gotten to know Courtney, and she's amazing. She's funny and smart and kind, and she deserves to know her family. But telling the truth means blowing up the lives of everyone I love. Some DNA tests reveal interesting ancestry. Mine revealed that my entire family history was a carefully constructed lie. That story is over. DNA tests are supposed to tell you where you came from, not completely rewrite your understanding of who your parents are. 30 years of keeping that secret, and one ancestry kit brought it all crashing down. The ripple effects of old choices have a way of finding you eventually. Let's move on to our next story, which shows what happens when trust gets completely shattered in the place you're supposed to feel safest. My roommate tried to evict me while I was on vacation. I'm 24, and I've been living with my roommate Brendan for about 8 months. We found each other through a roommate app and split a 2-bedroom apartment downtown. The arrangement has been pretty good overall. We keep to ourselves mostly, but get along fine when our paths cross. In July, I planned a 2-week vacation to visit my sister in Colorado. I'd been looking forward to this trip for months, since I hadn't seen her since she moved there 2 years ago. I told Brendan about the trip well in advance, and even offered to pay my half of the utilities while I was gone, since I wouldn't be using them. Before I left, everything seemed normal. Brendan said have a great trip, and asked me to bring back some of that good Colorado chocolate. I packed my bags, called an Uber to the airport, and started what I thought would be a relaxing 2 weeks hiking and catching up with family. The trip was incredible. My sister and I hiked through Rocky Mountain National Park, visited some amazing breweries, and spent hours talking about everything we'd missed in each other's lives. I felt more relaxed than I had in months. On my last day in Colorado, I got a text from Brendan that seemed odd. He asked what time my flight landed and said he hoped I'd had a good trip. It struck me as weird because we weren't really the type of roommates who checked in on each other's travel schedules, but I figured he was just being polite. When my plane landed at home, I took the train back to our neighborhood and walked up to our apartment building around 9 p.m. I was exhausted from traveling and looking forward to sleeping in my own bed. I put my key in the front door lock and it wouldn't turn. I tried it several times thinking maybe I was just tired and not doing it right. But the key definitely wasn't working. I checked to make sure I had the right key, that I was at the right apartment number. Everything was correct, but the lock had been changed. I knocked on the door, thinking maybe Brendan had changed the lock for security reasons and forgotten to mention it. No answer. I could see lights on inside and I was pretty sure I heard the TV, but Brendan wasn't responding. I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I texted him explaining that I was locked out and asking what had happened to the lock. No response. That's when I noticed the pile of trash bags by the dumpster that looked familiar. I walked over and unzipped one of the bags. Inside were my clothes, folded neatly, but definitely mine. I opened another bag and found my books, my kitchen supplies, my bathroom stuff. All of my belongings were sitting in trash bags next to the dumpster. I was standing there in shock, trying to process what was happening, when Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door came out to walk her dog. She saw me going through the bags and asked if I was okay. I live here, I told her, pointing to our apartment, but my roommate seems to have put all my stuff outside and changed the locks while I was on vacation. Mrs. Chen looked confused. Oh, honey, he told me you'd moved out. He said you'd found a place closer to work and wouldn't be living here anymore. He even introduced me to his new roommate yesterday. New roommate. Brendan had replaced me while I was gone and hadn't bothered to tell me. I spent that night in a hotel, trying to figure out what to do. I had texts with Brendan from before my trip, proving that I lived there and was just going on vacation. I had mail addressed to the apartment. My name was on utility accounts. But I also didn't have a lease, since we'd been subletting from the actual tenant who'd moved abroad. The next morning I went to the apartment building management office. The property manager, Mr. Rodriguez, was sympathetic but said his hands were tied. The lease was in the name of someone named Trevor, who'd moved to Prague 6 months ago. Brendan and I had both been subletting without official permission, which violated the lease terms. Mr. Rodriguez said that technically, neither Brendan nor I had legal right to be living there. But since Brendan was currently in possession of the apartment, and I couldn't prove I had any official agreement to live there, there wasn't much he could do. I tried calling Brendan repeatedly over the next few days. He finally answered on the third day and acted like nothing unusual had happened. "Oh hey, how was Colorado?" he said cheerfully. "Brendan, you changed the locks and put all my stuff in trash bags. What's going on?" "Yeah, sorry about that. My friend Marcus needed a place to stay, and since you were gone, I figured you'd moved out permanently. You never really seemed that settled here anyway." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was on vacation. A 2-week vacation. I told you exactly when I'd be back. Really? I don't remember that conversation. I thought you said you were moving to Colorado to be closer to your sister. He was gaslighting me, pretending like we'd never discussed my vacation plans. I had text messages proving otherwise, but he just kept insisting he'd misunderstood and thought I'd moved out permanently. The worst part was that Brendan had gone through my personal belongings while packing them up. Some of my things were missing, including a laptop and some expensive headphones. When I asked about them, He said he hadn't seen them and suggested maybe I'd taken them to Colorado and forgotten. I ended up having to find a new place to live with zero notice. Most of my savings went to security deposits and first month's rent. I had to replace the items that had gone missing and deal with the hassle of updating my address with banks, employers, and subscription services. I never got an explanation that made sense. My best guess is that Brendan had wanted his friend Marcus to move in for a while and saw my vacation as the perfect opportunity to make the switch without having to deal with the awkwardness of asking me to leave. The whole experience taught me to never trust someone with access to your home and belongings. Even someone who seems reasonable and trustworthy can completely screw you over when it's convenient for them. I'm settled in a new place now, living alone and paying more in rent, but feeling a lot more secure. I still occasionally see Brendan around the neighbourhood, and he always acts friendly, like he genuinely doesn't understand why I might be upset with him. Some people have no problem destroying someone else's stability for their own convenience. That story is over. Coming home from vacation to find your entire life packed in garbage bags is the kind of betrayal that makes you question everyone. The casual gaslighting afterward just makes it so much worse. Our next story comes from someone who discovered their spouse had been hiding some very expensive secrets. My husband secretly took out a loan in my name. I'm 29 and my husband Connor is 32. We've been married for 5 years and I thought we had a pretty solid handle on our finances. We both work full-time, split the bills evenly, and have always been transparent about our spending and debts. About 2 months ago, I was organising our paperwork for tax season when I found a credit card statement that I didn't recognise. It was addressed to me at our home address, but the card company wasn't one I'd ever used before. The statement showed a balance of over $15,000. My first thought was that it was some kind of mistake, or maybe identity theft. I called the credit card company to report it as fraud, but when I gave them my information, they confirmed that the account had been opened with all my correct details, including my social security number and employment information. The customer service representative walked me through the account history. The card had been opened 8 months earlier, with Connor listed as an authorized user. All the charges were local, at stores and restaurants we frequented regularly. Many of them were on dates and times when I knew Connor had been out without me. I felt sick as the reality started sinking in. Connor had somehow opened a credit card account in my name and had been using it for months without telling me. The charges weren't for anything obviously suspicious, just everyday expenses, but they added up to a massive debt that was entirely in my name. When Connor got home from work that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the credit card statement spread out in front of me. I didn't even say hello. I just pointed at the papers and asked him to explain. Connor's face went completely white when he saw what I was looking at. He sat down across from me and put his head in his hands for a long time before he started talking. He admitted that he'd opened the account using my information. He said his own credit was too poor to qualify for a card with a decent limit, but he needed access to credit for what he called business expenses. He'd been trying to start a consulting business on the side and needed the credit line to cover startup costs. I asked him why he hadn't just asked me to apply for a card jointly or to co-sign for a business loan. He said he'd been planning to tell me once the business got off the ground and he could start paying down the balance. He didn't want me to worry about the debt if the business didn't work out. But when I looked at the charges on the statement, they weren't business expenses. There were charges at expensive restaurants, bars, sporting goods stores, electronics retailers. Connor had been living way above our means for months and sticking me with the bill. The worst part was discovering that this wasn't the first time. When I started digging deeper into our finances, I found 2 other credit accounts that had been opened in my name over the past year. Between all 3 cards, Connor had racked up over $20,000 in debt that I was legally responsible for. My credit score had tanked because Connor had been missing payments on some of the accounts. I'd been wondering why I'd been getting rejected for a car loan a few months earlier, and now I knew why. Connor had destroyed my creditworthiness without me even knowing about it. When I confronted him about the other accounts, Connor broke down crying. He said the business had failed early on, but he'd been too ashamed to admit it. He'd kept using the credit cards to maintain our lifestyle because he didn't want me to know that he wasn't contributing as much financially as I thought he was. He'd been paying the minimum balances on the cards by taking cash advances from one card to pay another, creating this horrible cycle of debt that kept growing every month. He showed me spreadsheets where he'd been tracking all the balances and payment due dates, treating our financial ruin like some kind of complex math problem he could solve. I told Connor he had to figure out how to pay off every penny of that debt immediately, or I was filing for divorce. I wasn't going to let his financial deception destroy my future. He promised he would get a second job, sell his car, do whatever it took to make it right. But the damage was already done. My credit was ruined, which meant I couldn't refinance our mortgage or qualify for any new loans. We'd been planning to buy a bigger house and start trying for kids, but all of that was now impossible because of Connor's lies. The trust in our marriage was completely shattered. Every time Connor said he was going to the store or out with friends, I wondered if he was secretly spending money we didn't have. I started checking our bank accounts obsessively, looking for signs of other financial deception I might have missed. Connor did get a second job delivering food on weekends and evenings. He sold his car and started taking the bus to work. He cut up all the credit cards and put together a payment plan to tackle the debt. But even with his best efforts, it was going to take years to pay everything off. The worst part was realizing that Connor had been lying to my face every single day for months. Every time I'd ask about our finances, every time I'd suggest we start saving for a house or plan a vacation, he'd go along with it, knowing that we were actually drowning in secret debt. We're still together and working on rebuilding trust, but I handle all our finances now. Connor has to ask permission to spend money on anything other than basic necessities. I check our credit reports monthly to make sure there aren't any new accounts I don't know about. Some days I wonder if Connor would have ever told me the truth if I hadn't found that statement by accident. The thought that he might have kept lying indefinitely, letting the debt grow larger and larger while I remained oblivious, makes me question everything about our relationship. Financial infidelity turns out to be just as devastating as any other kind of betrayal. Maybe more so, because it affects every aspect of your future together. That story is over. Using someone's identity to rack up secret debt is about as low as it gets. The months of lying to her face while destroying her credit score just makes it exponentially worse. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Let's move on to our next story, which shows what happens when workplace compassion gets weaponized by the wrong person. My boss faked a cancer diagnosis. I'm 27 and I work at a mid-sized marketing company downtown. My boss, Linda, is 45 and has been with the company for about 8 years. She's always been well liked by everyone, the kind of manager who remembers your birthday and asks about your family. Last October, Linda called a team meeting and told us she'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. She was visibly emotional, explaining that she'd found a lump during a routine self-exam and that the biopsy had come back positive. She said she'd be starting chemotherapy soon, but planned to work as much as possible during treatment. Everyone on our team was devastated. Linda had always been supportive of all of us, and we wanted to do everything we could to help her through this. We immediately started brainstorming ways to make her life easier during treatment. One of my co-workers, Rachel, organised a meal train, so Linda would have dinner delivered every night during chemo weeks. Another co-worker set up a house cleaning service to come twice a month. We all pitched in money to cover the costs because we knew Linda was probably facing huge medical bills. Linda seemed so grateful for all the support. She'd tear up when talking about how much our help meant to her family. She'd update us regularly on her treatment progress, telling us about the side effects she was experiencing and how tired the chemo was making her. Over the next few months, we watched Linda go through what we thought was cancer treatment. She started wearing scarves and hats to cover what she said was hair loss from chemotherapy. She'd miss work for doctor appointments and treatment sessions. Some days she'd come in looking exhausted and pale. Our entire office rallied around Linda. The company gave her unlimited sick leave and told her to take as much time as she needed. Other departments heard about Linda's diagnosis and started contributing to a fund to help with her medical expenses. By Christmas, we'd raised over $8,000. Linda was so touched by everyone's generosity that she cried at the company holiday party. She gave a speech thanking everyone for their support and saying that she didn't know how she would have gotten through the hardest year of her life without her work family. In January, Linda told us that her latest scans had shown the cancer was responding well to treatment. She seemed optimistic about her prognosis and said her doctors were pleased with her progress. We were all so relieved and proud of how strong she'd been throughout everything. But in February, one of my co-workers made a discovery that changed everything. Rachel was scrolling through Instagram during her lunch break when she came across Linda's profile. Linda had posted a photo from what looked like a tropical vacation. She was on a beach wearing a bikini with a big smile and a full head of hair. The caption said something about enjoying some sunshine with her family. Rachel called me over to look at the photo. We were both confused because Linda had told us she was too weak from chemo to travel anywhere. The photo was dated from the previous weekend, when Linda had called in sick to work saying she was having a particularly rough treatment cycle. We started looking through more of Linda's recent Instagram posts. There were photos of her at restaurants, hiking trails, social events, all with timestamps from days when she'd supposedly been too sick to come to work. In every single photo, Linda looked healthy and vibrant, with no signs of illness. The most damning photo was from a company 5K run that Linda had participated in while supposedly undergoing chemotherapy. She was wearing a race bib and looked energetic and athletic, nothing like someone battling cancer. Rachel and I spent our lunch break going through months of Linda's social media posts. The timeline didn't match up at all with what she'd been telling us about her treatment. She'd been posting photos of herself, looking perfectly healthy, during the exact periods when she'd been telling us she was suffering from chemo side effects. We didn't know what to do with this information. It seemed impossible that Linda would lie about having cancer, but the evidence was right there on her public social media profiles. Finally, Rachel decided to take the screenshots to HR. She explained what we'd discovered and showed them the photos that contradicted Linda's claims about her health. HR said they'd investigate, but warned us not to discuss this with anyone else until they could figure out what was going on. The investigation didn't take long. HR contacted Linda's insurance company and discovered that she hadn't submitted any claims for cancer treatment. They reached out to the hospital where Linda claimed to be receiving chemotherapy and found no record of her as a patient. When HR confronted Linda with this evidence, she initially tried to explain it away. She said she was using alternative treatments that weren't covered by insurance. She claimed the photos had been taken during brief periods when she was feeling better between treatments. But when they pressed her for documentation of any medical treatment, Linda couldn't provide any. No doctor's notes, no prescription records, no hospital bills. She finally broke down and admitted that she'd never had cancer at all. Linda said she'd been going through a difficult time in her personal life and had made up the diagnosis to get sympathy and support from her co-workers. She said she'd never intended for it to go as far as it did, but once people started donating money and organising help, she didn't know how to back out without admitting she'd lied. The fallout was swift and brutal. Linda was fired immediately for fraud and breach of trust. The company had to figure out how to handle the thousands of dollars that employees had donated in good faith. Some people wanted to pursue legal action against Linda for essentially stealing money under false pretenses. But the emotional damage to our team was even worse than the financial loss. Everyone felt betrayed and manipulated. We'd spent months worrying about Linda, rearranging our schedules to cover her work, sacrificing our own time and money to help someone who was lying to us every single day. The worst part was thinking about all the genuine emotion we'd invested in Linda's fake crisis. The tears we'd shed worrying about her. The stress we'd felt watching someone we cared about supposedly fight for her life. the relief we'd experienced when she told us the treatment was working. All of those feelings had been based on lies. Linda had weaponized our compassion and turned our workplace into her personal sympathy scam. She'd exploited our trust and kindness for months, watching us sacrifice for her while knowing she was completely healthy. None of us have heard from Linda since she was fired. She deleted all her social media accounts and apparently moved out of state. But the damage she did to our team's trust and morale lasted for months afterward. That story is over. Faking cancer for sympathy and money is a special kind of evil. Watching your co-workers sacrifice their time and money while you're secretly posting beach vacation photos shows a complete lack of conscience. Some betrayals cut so deep they change how you see people forever. Our next story takes us into the world of modern dating deception. I found my girlfriend on a sugar baby site. I'm 30 and I've been dating Riley for about 10 months. She's 26, works as a freelance graphic designer, and we met through mutual friends at a house party last year. The relationship has been great overall, though I've always wondered how she manages to afford her lifestyle on what seemed like inconsistent freelance income. Riley lives in a really nice apartment downtown, drives a newer car, and always seems to have money for expensive dinners and weekend trips. When I'd ask about work, she'd say she had some high-paying corporate clients, but was pretty vague about the details. I figured freelance work could be unpredictable like that. About 3 weeks ago, my friend Trevor was showing me this article about sugar baby websites and how common they've become. He was scrolling through one of the sites as a joke, pointing out some of the ridiculous profiles. That's when I saw a photo that made my stomach drop. It was Riley. Same face, same apartment in the background, but the name on the profile was Scarlett, and the bio was completely different from anything she'd ever told me about herself. The profile said she was a college student studying business, looking for a generous gentleman who could help with tuition and living expenses. There were multiple photos of Riley in outfits I'd never seen her wear, posed in ways that were clearly meant to attract wealthy older men. I stared at the screen in shock while Trevor kept scrolling, oblivious to what I'd just discovered. I managed to act normal for the rest of the evening, but my mind was racing. Was Riley actually a sugar baby? Was that how she afforded her lifestyle? When I got home, I created a fake profile on the same website to see if I could find more information about Riley's account. Her profile was extensive, with dozens of photos and a detailed description of what she was looking for in an arrangement. According to the profile, Scarlett was available for dinner dates, weekend trips, and longer arrangements with the right person. She listed her interests as fine dining, travel, and fashion. The whole thing was professionally done, like she'd been doing this for a while. I felt sick reading through it. While we'd been building what I thought was a genuine relationship, Riley had apparently been maintaining this whole other identity as a sugar baby. The expensive dinners, the nice apartment, the designer clothes, it was all being funded by men who thought they were paying for her companionship. I didn't know how to confront Riley about this. I couldn't admit that I'd found her profile without revealing that I'd been snooping around sugar baby websites, but I also couldn't pretend like I hadn't seen it. Finally, I decided to approach it indirectly. The next time we were together, I brought up the subject of online dating and how crazy some of the websites had gotten. I mentioned sugar baby sites specifically and asked Riley if she'd ever heard of them. Riley got visibly uncomfortable and said she thought those kinds of arrangements were gross and exploitative. She said she couldn't understand how women could basically sell themselves like that. The whole time she was saying this, I was thinking about the dozens of photos of her on exactly that kind of website. Over the next week, I started paying more attention to Riley's schedule and behaviour. She'd often have dinner plans or meetings that she was vague about. She'd get dressed up and leave for hours at a time, coming back with shopping bags or talking about expensive restaurants she'd been to. When I'd ask who she'd been with, she'd usually say it was a potential client or someone interested in hiring her for design work. But the timing never quite added up with what I knew about her actual freelance projects. I also started noticing that Riley would get text messages at odd hours that she'd quickly dismiss or turn her phone face down to hide. She'd step out of the room to take certain phone calls, claiming they were work-related. 2 weeks after finding her profile, I decided I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I printed out screenshots of Riley's sugar baby profile and confronted her with them when she came over for dinner. Riley's face went completely white when she saw the printouts. For a moment, she just stared at them without saying anything. Then she asked where I'd gotten them and how long I'd known. I explained how I'd accidentally found her profile and that I'd been struggling with what to do about it ever since. Riley sat down heavily on my couch and put her head in her hands. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "I mean, it is what you think, but it's not like I'm sleeping with these guys. Most of them just want someone to have dinner with or go to events with them." She explained that she'd started sugar baby dating about 2 years ago when her freelance income wasn't enough to cover her expenses. She said it had started as just occasional dinner dates with lonely older men who wanted attractive company for business functions or social events. But over time, the arrangements had become more regular and more lucrative. Riley said she had 3 or 4 regular clients who paid her monthly allowances in exchange for being available for dinners, weekend trips, and social events. She insisted that the relationships were purely platonic and that she'd never crossed any physical boundaries. I asked her why she hadn't told me about this when we started getting serious. Riley said she'd been planning to stop the sugar baby thing once we became exclusive, but the money was too good to give up. She was making more from her arrangements than she ever had from graphic design work. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I just didn't know how to explain it without you thinking I was some kind of escort or something." But what really hurt was finding out that Riley had been on dates with other men throughout our entire relationship. While I'd been thinking we were building something exclusive and meaningful, she'd been out to dinner with wealthy older men who were paying for her time and attention. Riley begged me not to end things over this. She promised she would stop the sugar baby activities immediately and focus entirely on our relationship and her design career. She said the money wasn't worth losing what we had together, but I couldn't get past the deception. For 10 months, Riley had been living a double life, accepting money from other men while pretending to be in a committed relationship with me. Even if the arrangements were platonic, it felt like a form of emotional cheating. I also realised that I'd never really known the real Riley. So much of what I'd found attractive about her, her lifestyle, her confidence, her independence, had been funded by her sugar baby activities. I didn't know who she was without that money coming in. We broke up 3 days after that conversation. Riley moved out of her expensive apartment and back in with roommates. She deleted her sugar baby profiles and said she was going to focus on building her design business legitimately. Part of me wonders if we could have worked through it if she'd been honest from the beginning, but the months of deception and the fact that she'd been essentially dating other men for money while we were together was too much to overcome. That story is over. Finding out your girlfriend has been professionally dating other men while building a relationship with you is devastating. The months of lies about where the money was coming from just makes the betrayal that much deeper. Some secrets are too big to come back from. Our next story comes from someone who learned that family loyalty can be twisted into something completely toxic. My sister tried to sell my dog while I was away. I'm 25 and I've had my golden retriever, Cooper, since he was a puppy 4 years ago. He's my best friend and honestly the most well-trained, sweetest dog you could imagine. I live alone in a small apartment and Cooper has been my constant companion through job changes, breakups, and everything else life has thrown at me. My sister Lila is 28 and has always been judgmental about my life choices. She thinks I'm irresponsible because I chose to rent instead of buy a house, because I work in retail instead of getting what she calls a real career, and apparently because I own a dog while living in an apartment. Last month, I had to travel to Portland for my best friend's wedding. I was in the wedding party, so I'd be gone for 5 days, including travel time. I arranged for Cooper to stay with my neighbour, Mrs. Peterson, who's watched him before and absolutely loves him. Cooper knows her well, and I trusted her completely. The day before I left, Lila called and offered to take care of Cooper instead. She said it would be easier than bothering Mrs. Peterson and that she'd love to spend time with him. I was surprised since Lila had never shown much interest in Cooper before, but I thought maybe she was trying to be helpful for once. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Lila picked up Cooper, along with all his food, toys and supplies. I gave her detailed instructions about his routine, his medication for a minor skin condition, and the contact information for his vet. Cooper seemed happy enough to go with her, tail wagging as they left. The wedding was incredible, and I had an amazing time celebrating with my friends. I texted Lila a few times to check on Cooper, and she always responded that he was doing fine. She sent me a couple of photos of him in her backyard, looking relaxed and happy. On my flight home, I was excited to see Cooper again. I missed him terribly and couldn't wait for our reunion. When I landed, I texted Lila asking what time would be good to pick him up. Her response confused me. "We need to talk when you get home. Come to my house as soon as you can." I drove straight to Lila's house, expecting to find Cooper waiting for me at the door, like he usually does when he hears my voice. But when Lila answered the door, there was no Cooper in sight. "Where's Cooper?" I asked immediately. Lila invited me in and sat me down in her living room. She had this serious expression, like she was about to deliver bad news. "I found Cooper a new home," she said. "A really good family with kids and a big yard. They can give him the life he deserves." I stared at her, not comprehending what she'd just said. "What do you mean you found him a new home? Where is my dog?" Lila explained that she'd decided Cooper would be happier with a family instead of living in my small apartment. She'd posted him on several pet rehoming websites and social media groups, describing him as a dog whose owner could no longer care for him properly. "I got dozens of responses," she said proudly. "I interviewed several families and picked the perfect one. They have 2 kids and a huge fenced yard. Cooper will have so much more space to run and play." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Lila, you can't just give away my dog. He's not yours to give away. Where is he? I want him back right now." That's when Lila started lecturing me about responsible pet ownership. She said living in an apartment was cruel to a large dog like Cooper. She said my work schedule meant he was alone too much. She claimed she was doing what was best for Cooper, because I obviously wasn't capable of providing for him properly. "The new family already fell in love with him," she said. "He's happy there. It would be selfish of you to take him away from a better situation just because you're attached to him." I demanded the contact information for whoever had Cooper. Lila refused to give it to me, saying she'd promised the family anonymity and that showing up demanding the dog back would traumatize the children who were already bonding with him. I threatened to call the police. Lila laughed and said Cooper had been voluntarily surrendered by someone acting as his caretaker, so there was nothing illegal about what she'd done. She said any reasonable person would agree that Cooper was better off with his new family. The next few hours were a nightmare. I called every animal control office and police station in the area, trying to figure out what my legal options were. Most of them said it was a civil matter, and I'd need to work it out privately or get a lawyer involved. I spent the entire night driving around the neighbourhoods near Lila's house, hoping to spot Cooper in someone's yard. I posted on every local social media group and pet finder website, describing Cooper and explaining that he'd been given away without my permission. Finally, around midnight, I got a message from someone who'd seen my posts. They said they'd responded to an ad about a golden retriever earlier in the week, but hadn't been chosen to adopt him. They remembered the address where they'd met the dog because their kids had been disappointed not to get him. I drove to the address immediately, even though it was past midnight. The house was dark, but I could see a doghouse in the backyard. I parked across the street and waited until morning, hoping to catch a glimpse of Cooper. At 7 a.m, a man came out to let a dog into the yard for the morning. It was Cooper. I'd never been so relieved to see anyone in my life. I walked up to the front door and knocked. When the man answered, I explained that Cooper was my dog, and that my sister had given him away without permission while I was out of town. I showed him pictures of Cooper as a puppy, his veterinary records, his registration papers, everything proving he belonged to me. The man was shocked and embarrassed. He said a woman had contacted him through a rehoming website, claiming she needed to find a new home for her dog due to a change in living situation. She'd seemed legitimate and genuinely concerned about finding the right family. She said she was heartbroken to give him up, but wanted to do what was best for him, the man explained. We paid her a rehoming fee and everything. My heart sank. Not only had Lila given away my dog, she'd actually sold him and taken money for it. The man was incredibly understanding once he realised what had happened. His kids were upset about losing Cooper, but he agreed that returning him to his real owner was the right thing to do. He even refused to let me reimburse him for the rehoming fee, saying he felt terrible about the whole situation. Cooper went absolutely crazy when he saw me, jumping and whining and covering my face with kisses. It was clear he'd been confused and stressed by suddenly being separated from me and placed with strangers, even kind ones. When I confronted Lila about taking money for Cooper, she claimed the rehoming fee had just covered his food and supplies while he stayed with her. She insisted she'd done nothing wrong and that I was being dramatic about the whole situation. But when I pressed her about the exact amount, she admitted she'd charged the family $800. Cooper's food and supplies for 5 days couldn't have cost more than $50. She'd essentially sold my dog and pocketed the money. I told Lila I never wanted to see her again. She responded by saying I was being selfish and that Cooper would have been happier with his new family. She seemed genuinely convinced that she'd done the right thing, that her judgment about what was best for Cooper mattered more than my rights as his actual owner. It's been 2 months since this happened and Lila and I haven't spoken. She's complained to other family members that I'm holding a grudge over nothing, that she was just trying to help Cooper have a better life. Some relatives have actually taken her side, saying maybe Cooper would be happier with a family and a yard. But Cooper is perfectly happy in our apartment. He gets long walks twice a day, goes to the dog park regularly, and sleeps in my bed every night. He's well trained, well socialised, and obviously loves me as much as I love him. The idea that living in an apartment automatically makes someone an unfit pet owner is ridiculous. The whole experience taught me that some people will justify any betrayal by claiming they know what's best for you better than you do. Lila genuinely believed she had the right to make major decisions about my life and my pet because she disapproved of my living situation. Cooper and I are doing great now, but I still get anxious whenever I have to leave him with anyone else. The thought that someone could just decide to give him away while pretending to help me is terrifying. That story is over. The sheer arrogance of deciding someone else's pet would be better off somewhere else, and then actually selling the dog is mind-blowing. Taking money for it just adds insult to injury. Some people really think their opinions matter more than your actual ownership of your own pet. Let's move on to our next story, which takes us into the bizarre world of neighbourhood dynamics gone completely wrong. I accidentally walked into my neighbour's cult meeting. I'm 29 and I live in a quiet suburban neighbourhood where everyone mostly keeps to themselves. My neighbour 3 houses down, Walter, is this friendly older guy in his 60s who's always been really nice. He waves when I'm getting my mail, helps people with yard work, brings cookies to new neighbours. He seemed like the ideal neighbour. Last month, Walter invited me to what he called a community gathering at his house. He said he was trying to bring the neighbourhood together, maybe organise some block parties or community improvement projects. It sounded innocent enough, and I figured it would be good to meet more of my neighbours. Walter said the meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Saturday night. He mentioned that several other neighbours would be there and that his wife would be making refreshments. It sounded like a typical neighbourhood association type meeting. Saturday evening arrived, and I walked over to Walter's house right at 7. The front yard was full of cars I didn't recognise, which surprised me since Walter had made it sound like it would just be a few local neighbours. But I figured maybe word had spread and more people were interested than expected. I knocked on the front door, and Walter answered wearing this flowing white robe instead of his usual polo shirt and khakis. He seemed happy to see me, but his outfit was definitely unexpected for a neighbourhood meeting. Come in, he said enthusiastically. We're just getting started." I walked into Walter's living room and immediately realised I'd made a huge mistake. About 20 people were sitting in a circle on the floor, all wearing similar white robes. The furniture had been pushed against the walls and there were candles everywhere, casting weird, flickering shadows. In the centre of the circle was an altar, covered with crystals, incense, and what looked like animal bones. Everyone was holding hands and humming in some kind of harmony that definitely wasn't Kumbaya. Walter guided me to an empty spot in the circle and handed me a white robe. "Put this on," he whispered. "We're about to begin the invocation." I was too shocked to move. This was clearly not a neighbourhood association meeting. It was some kind of religious ceremony or ritual, and I had no idea what I'd stumbled into. A woman at the far side of the circle stood up and began speaking in what sounded like a made-up language. Everyone else responded with phrases I didn't understand, swaying back and forth while still holding hands. I tried to back toward the door, but Walter put his hand on my shoulder and guided me back to the circle. "Don't be nervous," he said quietly. "The spirits are very welcoming to newcomers." The spirits, I was apparently at some kind of séance or spiritual ceremony. The woman leading the chanting started calling on various entities to join our sacred circle and bless our gathering with divine wisdom. Then things got weirder. Everyone started sharing what they called visions they'd received since the last gathering. One man described seeing golden light around Walter's house. A woman talked about receiving messages from her deceased grandmother through her dreams. When it was Walter's turn to share, he talked about how the neighbourhood was built on sacred ground and how their group had been chosen to be guardians of the spiritual energy in the area. He said their weekly gatherings helped maintain the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. I realised this wasn't just a one-time thing. Walter and these people had been meeting regularly for who knows how long, performing rituals in his living room, while the rest of us had no idea what was going on. The ceremony continued with more chanting, some kind of blessing ritual involving burning herbs, and everyone taking turns touching the crystals on the altar. I sat there frozen, not sure if I should make a run for it or try to blend in until I could escape politely. Finally, Walter announced that it was time for the communion. Everyone reached under their chairs and pulled out small vials of what looked like homemade wine or juice. They all drank from their vials simultaneously while saying something about receiving the sacred essence. Hey! That's when I decided I'd had enough. I stood up and told Walter I needed to use the bathroom, then headed for the front door instead. Several people in the circle looked startled that I was breaking the formation. Walter followed me to the door and asked if I was feeling overwhelmed by the spiritual energy. He said some people needed time to adjust to the intensity of their practices and that I was welcome to come back when I felt ready. "This wasn't what you told me it would be," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Walter looked confused. "I told you it was a community gathering." "This is our community. We gather every week to maintain the spiritual wellness of the neighbourhood." I left without saying anything else, speed walking back to my house while still processing what I'd just experienced. Walter had somehow convinced himself that inviting me to a ritual ceremony was the same thing as inviting me to a neighbourhood meeting. The next morning, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox. It was from Walter, apologising if I'd felt uncomfortable and explaining that their group practiced ancient wisdom traditions that helped protect and bless our neighbourhood. He said I was always welcome to join them and that they'd be happy to help me develop my own spiritual gifts. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention to Walter's house on Saturday evenings. Sure enough, the same cars would show up around 7 p.m. and leave around 10. I could sometimes see the flickering candlelight through his windows and occasionally hear the group chanting. I also started noticing other weird things about Walter's property. He'd installed wind chimes all around his yard that created this constant musical sound. He'd planted specific herbs and flowers in geometric patterns that I now realized probably had some kind of spiritual significance. One evening, my next-door neighbor mentioned that Walter had offered to cleanse the negative energy from her house after her husband died. She thought it was a sweet gesture and let him come over with his incense and crystals to perform some kind of blessing ceremony. I realized Walter had probably been trying to recruit other neighbors into his spiritual group for months, just more subtly than he'd attempted with me. The man I'd thought was just a friendly neighbor was actually the leader of what was essentially a neighborhood cult. Walter still waves when he sees me getting my mail, but now it feels different. He'll sometimes mention that his door is always open if I ever want to explore the deeper mysteries or connect with the spiritual realm. He seems genuinely convinced that his practices are beneficial and that I am missing out by not participating. I've wondered if I should report this to someone, but I'm not sure what law they're breaking by having religious ceremonies in Walter's living room. They're not bothering anyone or causing property damage. They're just really, really weird. The weirdest part is that Walter still acts like a normal neighbor most of the time. He'll help people carry groceries or offer to water plants when they're on vacation. But every Saturday night, he transforms into some kind of spiritual leader, guiding his followers through rituals I don't even want to understand. I'm just grateful I found out what Walter's community gatherings were really about before I got too involved. Some invitations are definitely better declined. That story is over. Nothing quite like expecting a block party planning meeting and walking into a full-blown ritual with robes and altars. Walter really thought community gathering was an accurate description of his weekly seance sessions. The casual invitation makes it so much more disturbing. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that family secrets can get incredibly complicated when generations get mixed up. My mum's best friend ran away with my brother. I'm 24, and this situation has completely torn apart both our family and another family I've known my entire life. My mum's best friend, Patricia, is 47, the same age as my mum, and they've been inseparable since college. Patricia was like a second mother to me and my brother throughout our childhood. Patricia has been married to her husband, Robert, for 22 years, and they have twin daughters who are 19. The girls are currently freshmen in college, and Patricia seemed to be going through some kind of midlife crisis after they left for school. She'd been talking about feeling invisible and forgotten, like her whole identity had been wrapped up in being a mum. My brother Cameron is 21 and just finished his junior year at the local university. He's always been mature for his age, and Patricia had always treated him like one of her own kids. She'd pick him up from school when my mum was working late, help him with homework, include him in their family vacations. About 6 months ago, Patricia started coming over to our house more often, usually when my parents were at work, but Cameron was home. She said she was feeling lonely with the girls away at college and Robert working long hours. She'd bring lunch for Cameron or help him with his laundry, motherly things that seemed innocent enough. But I started noticing that Patricia was paying more attention to her appearance when she came over. She'd wear makeup and nice outfits just to hang out at our house in the middle of the day. She started buying Cameron expensive gifts, things that seemed excessive for someone who wasn't actually his mother. In March, Patricia and Robert got into a huge fight about their marriage. Patricia felt like Robert had been taking her for granted and wasn't paying attention to her emotional needs. She started staying at our house more often, sleeping in the guest room when she needed space from her husband. My parents were supportive because Patricia was going through a rough time, and they wanted to help their friend. They had no idea that something inappropriate was developing between Patricia and Cameron. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when I came home early from work one day and found Patricia and Cameron sitting very close together on the couch, holding hands and talking in whispers. When they saw me, they immediately separated, and Patricia started talking loudly about helping Cameron with his resume. But the energy in the room felt charged and uncomfortable. Cameron looked guilty, and Patricia seemed flustered. I didn't say anything at the time because I couldn't quite process what I might have witnessed. A few weeks later, I caught them kissing in our kitchen. Not a motherly kiss, a romantic kiss. I was so shocked I just backed out of the room without saying anything, but I couldn't unsee what I'd witnessed. That night, I confronted Cameron in his room. At first, he tried to deny it, saying I'd misunderstood what I saw, but eventually he broke down and admitted that he and Patricia had developed feelings for each other. It just happened, he said. She was going through a hard time with Robert, and I was helping her feel better. We started talking more and more and realised we had this connection. I was horrified. Patricia was not only our mother's best friend, she was more than twice Cameron's age and married with children. The whole situation was twisted on multiple levels. Cameron said they'd been trying to fight their feelings, but couldn't stay away from each other. He claimed Patricia understood him better than anyone ever had, and that their age difference didn't matter, because he was mature for his age. I told Cameron he needed to end whatever was happening immediately. I said Patricia was taking advantage of him, and that this would destroy both families if anyone found out. Cameron got defensive and said I couldn't understand their connection because I'd never experienced real love. But the situation was about to explode anyway. 2 weeks later, Patricia left Robert and moved into an apartment across town. She told everyone, including my parents, that she needed space to figure out her marriage and her future. What she didn't tell anyone was that Cameron had been helping her move and was spending most of his time at her new apartment. I started noticing that Cameron was barely coming home, always making excuses about studying late at the library or staying with friends. Then Patricia's husband Robert called my dad, frantic because he'd discovered text messages between Patricia and Cameron on an old phone she'd forgotten about. The messages were explicitly romantic and sexual, leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Robert confronted Patricia and she confessed everything. She said she'd fallen in love with Cameron and that she was leaving her marriage to be with him. She claimed Cameron made her feel young and alive again in a way she hadn't felt in years. When my parents found out, they were devastated. My mum felt betrayed by her best friend and horrified that her son was involved in breaking up a marriage. My dad was furious with Cameron and threatened to kick him out of the house if he didn't end the relationship immediately. But Cameron chose Patricia. He moved into her apartment and cut off contact with our family when they refused to accept the relationship. He said we were being judgmental and that love doesn't follow society's rules about age or circumstances. Patricia's daughters came home from college and refused to speak to their mother. They were disgusted that she'd left their father for someone barely older than they were. Robert filed for divorce immediately and is fighting for everything in the settlement. The whole neighbourhood found out about the scandal within days. My mum lost her best friend and became the subject of gossip about how she'd raised her son. People whispered about whether she'd known what was happening and had allowed it to continue. Patricia and Cameron have been together for 3 months now. They act like they're in this grand romantic love story, posting pictures together on social media and talking about their plans to move somewhere they can start fresh. They seem oblivious to the destruction they've caused. Cameron's relationship with our family is completely ruined. He occasionally sends texts asking when we're going to accept his choices and welcome Patricia into the family. He doesn't seem to understand that some bridges can't be rebuilt. Patricia went from being like a second mother to me to being someone I can't stand to look at. She destroyed her marriage, abandoned her daughters, and seduced my brother, all because she was feeling neglected and wanted to feel desired again. The most disturbing part is that Patricia groomed Cameron while pretending to be a family friend. She used his trust and his immaturity to manipulate him into a relationship that serves her emotional needs while destroying his relationship with his actual family. I don't know if Cameron will ever realise what Patricia did to him, or if he'll wake up in a few years and understand how inappropriate the whole situation was. Right now, he's convinced they're soulmates and that everyone else just doesn't understand their connection. Meanwhile, Robert is trying to rebuild his life at 49 after his wife left him for someone young enough to be his son. Patricia's daughters are in therapy, trying to process their mother's betrayal, and my parents are questioning everything they thought they knew about their friend and their son. Some relationships destroy everything they touch. That story is over. A 47-year-old woman grooming her best friend's 21-year-old son is absolutely predatory behavior disguised as a love story. The fact that she was a trusted family friend for years makes the betrayal even more devastating. Cameron may think it's romance, but Patricia manipulated a situation where she had power and trust. Our next story shows us how identity theft can happen right under your nose from someone you'd never suspect. My co-worker pretended to be me online. I'm 26 and I work at a small marketing firm with about 15 employees. My co-worker Amber is 28 and we've worked together for 2 years. She's always been friendly and we'd occasionally grab lunch together or chat about weekend plans. About 6 months ago, I started getting weird messages on social media from men I'd never met. They'd send me flirty messages or act like we'd been having ongoing conversations. At first I thought it was just random creeps, but the messages seemed too specific and personal to be completely random. One guy messaged me saying he'd enjoyed our video chat the night before and was looking forward to meeting in person. I'd definitely never video chatted with this stranger, so I told him he had the wrong person. He insisted we'd been talking for weeks and sent me screenshots of conversations that looked like they were from my social media account. The screenshots showed messages that I'd never sent, but they were coming from profiles that had my name and my photos. Someone was impersonating me online and having conversations with men using my identity. I started investigating and found multiple fake profiles on different dating sites and social media platforms. All of them use my photos, my name, and details about my life that someone would need to know me personally to have. The profiles were detailed and convincing, with information about my job, my hobbies, and my family. At first I thought maybe someone had hacked my social media accounts and stolen my photos. But my actual accounts were secure, and I hadn't lost access to anything. Someone had manually created these fake profiles using information they'd gathered about me. The fake profiles were actively being used to chat with men, and whoever was running them was good at maintaining conversations. They knew enough about my personality and interests to fool people into thinking they were really talking to me. I reported the fake profiles to the platforms, but new ones kept popping up faster than I could get them removed. Whoever was doing this was persistent and seemed to have unlimited time to create new accounts. Then I started getting phone calls from men who said they'd been talking to me online. Some of them were angry, claiming I'd been leading them on or asking for money. Others seemed genuinely confused when I told them I'd never spoken to them before. One man called my work phone, which really freaked me out. He'd gotten my office number from someone claiming to be me and wanted to surprise claim to be me, who had given it to him during their online conversations. That's when I realized whoever was impersonating me had access to specific details about my job and workplace. I started paying closer attention to my co-workers, wondering if someone I worked with could be behind this. The fake profiles knew details about my daily routine, my work schedule, and even things like what I'd eaten for lunch or worn to work on specific days. The breakthrough came when one of the men who'd been talking to my impersonator sent me a video call screenshot. In the background of what was supposed to be my apartment, I could see a distinctive lamp that I recognized immediately. It was the same lamp that sat on Amber's desk at work. I started watching Amber more carefully and noticed that she'd been taking photos of me without my knowledge. She'd hold up her phone like she was checking messages, but I could see she was actually using the camera. She'd do this when we were at lunch, during office meetings, or just sitting at our desks. I also realized that Amber had been asking me a lot of personal questions over the past few months. Questions about my dating life, my family, my interests. I'd thought she was just being friendly, but now I understood she was gathering information to make her impersonation more convincing. The final piece of evidence came when I set up a fake male profile and found one of the accounts impersonating me. I started chatting with my own impersonator and quickly realized it was Amber based on her writing style and the specific details she knew about my life. During our fake conversation, the person pretending to be me mentioned being at work and described exactly what I was wearing that day. I looked over at Amber and saw her typing on her phone while glancing at my outfit. I confronted Amber the next morning before anyone else got to the office. I showed her the fake profiles, the screenshots from the men who'd contacted me, and the evidence that she'd been running the accounts. At first, Amber tried to deny it, but when I showed her the video call screenshot with her lamp in the background, she broke down and admitted everything. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, crying. "It started as just a stupid joke. I created one fake profile using your photos just to see if I could get matches. But then men started messaging and I got addicted to the attention." Amber explained that she'd always felt invisible and unattractive compared to me. She said men never noticed her, but when she used my photos, suddenly she was getting dozens of messages and feeling desired for the first time in her life. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said. "I never gave anyone your real contact information or tried to meet them in person. I just wanted to know what it felt like to be wanted." But Amber had given out some of my real information. She'd told several men where I worked, given them my work phone number, and even shared details about my daily routine. Some of these men had started looking for me in real life, based on the information she'd provided. I told Amber she needed to delete all the fake accounts immediately and stop using my identity online. She promised she would, but I didn't trust her to follow through on her own. I reported the situation to our HR department and showed them all the evidence I'd collected. They were horrified that an employee was using a co-worker's identity for catfishing and said it created serious liability issues for the company. Amber was fired within a week. HR said using a co-worker's identity online constituted harassment and created a hostile work environment. They were also concerned about the potential legal issues if any of the men she'd been talking to tried to track me down. Even after Amber was fired, it took months to clean up the mess she'd created. I had to file police reports, work with social media platforms to remove fake accounts, and deal with confused or angry men who thought they'd been talking to me. Some of the men Amber had been chatting with had developed real feelings for who they thought was me. They were hurt and confused when I explained that they'd been talking to someone else entirely. A few of them didn't believe me and insisted I was lying about not knowing them. The worst part was realizing that someone I'd considered a friend had been studying me like a science project, collecting information about my life to use for her own entertainment. Every friendly conversation we'd had, every lunch we'd shared, Amber had been gathering material to make her impersonation more convincing. I also felt violated knowing that Amber had been taking photos of me without my consent for months. Every time I'd caught her looking at her phone, she might have been capturing images to use in her fake profiles. I'd been completely unaware that my daily life was being documented for someone else's catfishing scheme. The experience made me much more careful about what I share with co-workers and how much personal information I reveal in casual conversations. I also became paranoid about people taking photos of me and started checking regularly for fake profiles using my identity. Amber tried to contact me a few weeks after she was fired to apologize again and ask if I could help her get another job. She said she'd learned her lesson and would never do anything like this again. I blocked her on everything and haven't heard from her since. The whole situation taught me that identity theft doesn't always come from hackers or strangers online. Sometimes it comes from someone sitting right next to you who's been quietly collecting pieces of your life to use for their own purposes. That story is over. Having a co-worker systematically document your life to catfish people is such a creepy violation of trust. The months of secretly photographing someone and stealing personal details for fake profiles is genuinely disturbing behaviour. Amber turned workplace friendship into a harvesting operation for her catfishing hobby. Our next story takes family drama to a whole new level When someone decides a wedding is the perfect place to cause maximum chaos, my dad crashed my wedding to object. I'm 28 and I've been planning my dream wedding for over a year. My fiancé Trevor and I have been together for 4 years and we're perfect for each other. The only problem has been my relationship with my dad, who's never approved of Trevor for reasons I've never fully understood. My dad Richard has always been controlling and has strong opinions about what my life should look like. When I was younger, he'd interfere in my friendships if he didn't like certain kids. He'd criticise my career choices and try to steer me toward jobs he thought were more appropriate. When I started dating Trevor 3 years ago, my dad immediately disliked him. Trevor works as a social worker, which my dad considers beneath me since I have a master's degree in business. My dad thinks Trevor isn't ambitious enough and won't be able to provide the lifestyle he wants for me. Trevor is actually amazing. He's kind, thoughtful, hard-working, and completely devoted to helping kids in foster care. He makes decent money and we're financially stable together. But my dad sees Trevor's job as evidence that he's not good enough for his daughter. Over the past year of wedding planning, my dad has been increasingly difficult. He'd make snide comments about Trevor during family dinners. He'd ask when I was going to come to my senses and find someone more suitable. He even suggested I should postpone the wedding to make sure I was making the right choice. But my dad had been invited to the wedding and said he would attend. He helped pay for some of the expenses and seemed to have accepted that Trevor and I were getting married, whether he liked it or not. I thought he'd finally made peace with my choice. The wedding was beautiful. We had the ceremony at a historic mansion with gardens and everything looked perfect. About 150 guests were there, including both of our families and all our closest friends. I felt like a princess in my dress and Trevor looked incredibly handsome in his tuxedo. The ceremony started smoothly. Trevor and I exchanged personal vows that had everyone crying happy tears. We'd gotten through the ring exchange and the officiant was just about to pronounce us husband and wife when something went wrong. If anyone has any reason these two should not be wed, speak now or forever, hold your peace, the officiant said, following the traditional ceremony script. It's a line that's usually just ceremonial. Nobody ever actually objects at weddings. But before the officiant could continue, my dad stood up in the third row. I object, he said loudly, his voice carrying across the entire outdoor ceremony space. Everyone turned to stare at him in shock. The officiant looked confused, probably having never dealt with an actual objection before. Trevor and I just stood there holding hands, not knowing what to do. "Richard, sit down," my mum hissed from beside him, but my dad ignored her. He walked out into the aisle and addressed the crowd like he was giving a speech. "I can't let my daughter make the biggest mistake of her life," he announced. "Trevor is not the right man for her, and I won't stand by and watch her settle for less than she deserves." I was mortified. Our entire wedding party was staring, our guests were whispering, and the photographer was capturing every second of this nightmare. This was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my life, and my dad was turning it into a public humiliation. "Dad, stop," I said, but he kept going. He started listing all his complaints about Trevor. His job wasn't prestigious enough. He came from a lower-class family. He didn't have ambition to advance in his career. He'd never be able to give me the lifestyle my dad thought I deserved. Trevor just stood there taking it, his face getting redder with each insult. I could see his hands shaking, and I knew he was trying not to lose his temper in front of all our guests. Finally, Trevor spoke up. "With respect, Mr. Williams, this is between me and your daughter. She's an adult who can make her own choices." "She's making the wrong choice," my dad shot back. "And as her father, I have a responsibility to protect her from her own poor judgment." That's when I'd had enough. I told my dad that he could either sit down and let me marry the man I loved, or he could leave the wedding immediately. I said if he couldn't support my happiness, then he wasn't welcome at my ceremony. My dad looked shocked that I'd stood up to him so directly in front of everyone. He glanced around at all the staring guests, probably realizing for the first time how inappropriate his behavior was. "You'll regret this decision," he said finally. "When this marriage falls apart, don't come crying to me." he walked out of the ceremony, with my mum running after him trying to convince him to come back. About a dozen other relatives followed them, causing a huge disruption right in the middle of what was supposed to be the most important moment of my life. The officiant asked if we wanted to take a break, but I said no. I wasn't going to let my dad ruin my wedding completely. We finished the ceremony with about half our guests missing, and the officiant pronounced us husband and wife to much more subdued applause than there should have been. The reception was awkward because everyone kept asking what had happened and whether my dad was okay. Instead of celebrating, Trevor and I spent most of the evening reassuring guests that we were fine and trying to pretend like the objection hadn't completely overshadowed our wedding. My dad didn't just object to our marriage. He created a scene so dramatic that it became the main thing people remembered about our wedding day. Instead of talking about how beautiful the ceremony was or how happy we looked, everyone talked about my dad's meltdown. The worst part was that some family members took my dad's side. They said maybe he had a point about Trevor, that perhaps I was settling for someone who wasn't ambitious enough. They suggested that my dad's dramatic objection came from a place of love and concern. But I know my dad's objection had nothing to do with protecting me. It was about control. He couldn't stand that I was making a major life decision without his approval, so he tried to sabotage it in the most public way possible. Trevor and I have been happily married for 6 months now. We have a great relationship, we're building a life together, and we support each other's goals and dreams. My dad was completely wrong about Trevor not being good enough for me. My dad and I haven't spoken since the wedding. He's reached out a few times through my mum, suggesting that we should work things out, and that he's willing to give Trevor a chance. But he's never apologised for ruining our wedding day, or acknowledged how inappropriate his behaviour was. Some relatives keep pushing me to reconcile with my dad, saying family's more important than holding grudges. But my dad showed me exactly how little he respects me as an adult when he decided to humiliate me at my own wedding rather than accept my choice in partners. Trevor deserved better than to be publicly insulted on our wedding day. I deserved better than to have my most important moment turned into a family drama. And our guests deserved better than to witness such an uncomfortable scene at what was supposed to be a celebration. My dad chose to make our wedding about him and his disapproval rather than about me and my happiness. That's not something I can just forgive and forget, no matter how much time passes. That story is over. Objecting at someone's wedding because you don't think their partner is ambitious enough is next-level family sabotage. Standing up in the middle of someone's wedding ceremony to air your grievances about their choice in partners shows a complete lack of respect and basic human decency. Some parents really think their opinion matters more than their child's happiness, even on the most important day of their life. Our next story comes from someone who thought they knew their family history until a simple piece of paperwork changed everything. I found out my sister is my biological mother. I'm 20 years old, and I always thought I had a pretty normal family situation. My parents, Carol and Dennis, are 52 and 54, and my older sister, Rachel, is 38. There's a big age gap between me and Rachel, but I never thought much of it. My parents always said I was a surprise baby who came along when they thought they were done having kids. Rachel moved out when I was little, so we weren't super close growing up, but she'd visit for holidays and birthdays. She never got married or had kids of her own, which my parents always said was because she was too focused on her career in real estate. Last month, I needed a copy of my birth certificate to apply for a passport. My parents were out of town, so they told me to check the filing cabinet in their home office, where they keep all the important documents. I found the folder labelled with my name and pulled out what I thought was my birth certificate. But there were actually 2 birth certificates in the folder. One was the standard one I'd seen before, listing Carol and Dennis as my parents. But underneath it was another document that looked official but different. This one listed Rachel as the mother and had father unknown in the other field. I stared at both documents for probably 20 minutes, trying to figure out what I was looking at. The dates were the same, the hospital was the same, but the parents were completely different. One document said I was Carol and Dennis's child. The other said I was Rachel's. My first thought was that there had been some kind of clerical error at the hospital, that maybe they'd mixed up paperwork or something. But the more I looked at the documents, the more real they both seemed. They had different certificate numbers and different signatures. When my parents got back from their trip, I confronted them with both birth certificates. I asked them to explain why there were two different documents with different parents listed. The look that passed between them told me everything I needed to know before they even started talking. My mum, Carol, started crying immediately. My dad sat down heavily in his chair and just stared at the floor. Finally, Carol said the words that changed my entire understanding of my life. "Rachel is your biological mother," she said quietly. "We adopted you when you were 3 days old." The story came out slowly, with lots of tears and long pauses. When Rachel was 18 and still living at home, she'd gotten pregnant by a guy she was dating casually. She was just finishing high school and had plans to go to college. She didn't want to raise a baby at 18 and derail her entire future. Carol and Dennis had been trying to have another baby for years without success. When Rachel came to them with her situation, they offered to adopt the baby and raise it as their own. Rachel agreed, thinking it would be better for everyone involved. They'd planned to tell me the truth when I was older, but years kept passing and it never felt like the right time. Rachel went along with pretending to be my aunt because she thought it would be less confusing for me. She figured I was better off thinking I had two loving parents than trying to understand a complicated family arrangement. "We never meant to lie to you," Carol said. "We just wanted you to have a normal childhood without feeling different or confused about your place in the family." But I did feel confused now. Rachel wasn't my sister, who lived across town and visited for holidays. She was my mother, who'd given me up and then watched my parents raise me while pretending to be something else entirely. I called Rachel that night and asked her to meet me for coffee. When I showed her the birth certificates, she broke down just like Carol had. She said keeping the secret had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, especially as I got older and we started developing more of a relationship. "Every time I saw you, I wanted to tell you," she said. "But your parents, our parents, they asked me not to because they thought it would hurt you. And I didn't want to disrupt the family you'd grown up knowing." Rachel explained that she'd stayed involved in my life, partly because she couldn't bear to completely walk away from her child, even though she'd made the decision to let Carol and Dennis raise me. Every birthday gift, every Christmas visit, every time she asked about school or sports, she'd been acting as my mother while pretending to be my aunt. The hardest part was realizing that my entire family had been in on this secret. My grandparents knew. My aunts and uncles knew. Probably neighbours and family friends knew. I'd been the only person who didn't know the truth about my own birth. I also started understanding things that had never made sense before. Why Rachel never got married or had kids, even though she seemed to love children. Why my parents were so protective of Rachel and always made excuses for her when she'd miss family events. Why Rachel always seemed to know exactly what to get me for presents and remembered details about my interests that even my friends forgot. The weirdest part was trying to figure out how to process this information. Carol and Dennis were still the people who'd raised me, who'd been there for every scraped knee and school play and late-night homework session. But Rachel was my biological mother, who'd been pretending to be my sister for 20 years. Rachel said she didn't expect me to suddenly start calling her mum or change our relationship dramatically. She said she was grateful to have been part of my life at all and didn't want to make things more complicated than they already were. But I couldn't stop thinking about all the conversations we'd had where she'd given me advice about dating or college or career choices. She'd been speaking as my mother, drawing on maternal instincts, while I thought she was just being a caring older sister. I also wondered about my biological father. Rachel said she'd lost touch with him years ago and didn't think he even knew I existed. She'd been young and the relationship hadn't been serious. She didn't think there was any point in tracking him down now, but she'd give me whatever information she had if I wanted to look for him. It's been a month since I found out the truth, and I'm still processing everything. Carol and Dennis are still my parents, in every way that matters. They're the ones who raised me, and loved me, and made me who I am. But knowing that Rachel is my biological mother has changed how I see our entire family dynamic. Rachel and I have been talking more, trying to figure out what our relationship looks like, now that the secret is out. She's somewhere between a sister and a mother, and I'm somewhere between a nephew and a son. It's complicated, but we're working through it. The hardest part is feeling like I can't trust my own memories anymore. Every family gathering, every conversation, every interaction I've ever had with Rachel needs to be reinterpreted through this new lens. 20 years of thinking I knew who I was and where I came from, all based on a lie that everyone agreed to keep. Some family secrets are too big to stay buried forever. That story is over. Finding out your sister is actually your mother through a random document search is the kind of family plot twist that rewrites your entire life story. 20 years of everyone knowing except you must feel like living in some kind of elaborate performance where you are the only one not given the script. Our next story comes from someone who learned that some people will steal literally anything if they think they can get away with it. My best friend stole my baby name. I'm 29 and I've been best friends with Olivia since college. We've been through everything together: breakups, job changes, family drama, you name it. When I got pregnant 2 years ago, Olivia was the first person I called. She was so excited and immediately started planning baby showers and talking about being the best aunt ever. During my pregnancy, I spent months researching baby names. I wanted something unique but not weird, meaningful but not pretentious. I finally settled on the name Emerson Rose for a girl or Emerson James for a boy. I loved how it sounded strong but elegant, and it had personal meaning because my grandmother's middle name was Rose. I told Olivia about the name early in my pregnancy because I was so excited about it. She said it was beautiful and perfect, that she could totally see me having a little Emerson. We'd joke about how Emerson would be spoiled by Aunt Olivia and how she'd teach the baby all kinds of trouble. Unfortunately, I lost the baby at 24 weeks due to complications. It was devastating, the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Olivia was incredible during that time, bringing me food, sitting with me while I cried, helping me figure out what to do with all the baby stuff we'd already bought. The grieving process was long and difficult. For months, I couldn't even think about trying to get pregnant again. The name Emerson became so tied to my loss that I couldn't imagine using it for another child. It felt like it belonged to the baby I'd lost. About a year later, I met my now husband Thomas through work. Our relationship moved quickly, and I got pregnant again 6 months after we started dating. This time, everything went perfectly. When we found out we were having a girl, Thomas and I decided to name her Charlotte after his grandmother. I was excited to tell Olivia about the pregnancy, but her reaction was strange. She seemed happy but also distant, like something was bothering her. When I told her we'd chosen the name Charlotte, she said it was nice but seemed distracted. A few weeks later, Olivia announced that she was pregnant too. She and her boyfriend Marcus had been trying for a while and were thrilled. I was so happy for her, especially since we'd both struggled with fertility issues. The idea of our kids growing up together and being best friends, like we were, seemed perfect. Throughout our pregnancies, Olivia and I compared notes about symptoms, cravings, and baby preparations. She seemed excited but was oddly secretive about baby names. Every time I asked what names she was considering, she'd say they hadn't decided yet, or that she wanted to wait until the baby was born to choose. Olivia was due 2 weeks after me. Charlotte was born healthy and perfect in March, and I was completely in love with being a mum. Olivia came to visit us in the hospital and seemed genuinely happy, cooing over Charlotte and saying all the right things about how beautiful she was. 2 weeks later, Olivia went into labour. I was still recovering from delivery, but wanted to be there for her, like she'd been for me. When I got to the hospital, Marcus met me in the waiting room with a huge smile. "She's here," he said excitedly. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, completely healthy. I asked what they'd named her, expecting to hear one of the traditional names Olivia had mentioned liking during our conversations. "Emerson Rose," Marcus said proudly. "Isn't that beautiful?" Olivia said it came to her in a dream. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Emerson Rose was my name, the name I'd chosen for the baby I'd lost. Olivia knew exactly how much that name meant to me and the pain associated with it. She'd stolen it and was now using it for her own daughter. I managed to congratulate Marcus and go see Olivia and the baby, but inside I was devastated. Looking at baby Emerson, I couldn't help but think about my own Emerson, who never made it home from the hospital. When I was alone with Olivia, I asked her about the name choice. She acted like it was completely innocent, saying she'd always loved the name Emerson and that Rose was her grandmother's middle name too. She claimed it was just a coincidence that it was the same name I'd chosen. But I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Olivia didn't have a grandmother named Rose. She'd made that up. And she'd never mentioned liking the name Emerson before I told her about my choice. She'd deliberately chosen the name that was most meaningful and painful to me. When I confronted her about it, Olivia got defensive. She said I didn't own the name just because I'd chosen it first. She pointed out that I'd ended up using Charlotte instead, so it wasn't like I needed the name Emerson anymore. "You're not even using it," she said. "Why can't I have it if you don't want it?" But that wasn't the point. I wasn't using the name because it was tied to a loss that was still painful for me. Seeing her baby with that name felt like she was parading my grief around and claiming it as her own joy. The worst part was that Olivia acted like I was being unreasonable for being upset. She said she'd thought I'd be happy that the name was being used for a healthy baby instead of just being associated with loss. She claimed she was honouring my lost baby by using the name. But using my baby's name without permission didn't honour anything. It felt like theft, like she'd taken something precious that belonged to my grief and my memory and made it about her own happiness. Our friendship never recovered from this. I tried to maintain a relationship for a while, but every time I heard someone call her daughter Emerson, it was like reopening a wound. Every birthday party, every social media post, every casual mention of the name brought back the pain of my loss. Olivia seemed genuinely confused about why I was so hurt. She'd post pictures of her Emerson, with captions about how perfect the name was, how it suited her daughter perfectly, how she'd always dreamed of having an Emerson. It was like she'd rewritten history to make herself the original owner of the name. Other friends started taking sides. Some people said I was overreacting, that baby names can't be owned, and that Olivia had the right to choose whatever name she wanted for her child. Others understood why I felt betrayed and thought Olivia should have chosen something else, out of respect for our friendship and my loss. The final straw came when Olivia asked me to be Emerson's godmother. She said it would be meaningful since I'd inspired the name choice. She genuinely seemed to think this was a sweet gesture, not understanding that it felt like she was asking me to officially bless her theft of my baby's name. I declined and told Olivia that I couldn't continue our friendship. She accused me of being selfish and letting jealousy ruin what we'd built over the years. She said she was disappointed that I couldn't be happy for her daughter just because of a name. But it wasn't just about a name. It was about trust and respect and understanding the significance of what she'd taken from me. A true friend wouldn't have used the name I'd chosen for my lost baby, especially without discussing it with me first. It's been over a year since we stopped speaking. I occasionally see updates about Emerson through mutual friends, and it still stings. Olivia never apologised or acknowledged why her choice was hurtful. She maintains that she did nothing wrong, and that I'm the one who ended our friendship over something trivial. Maybe some people would say it's just a name, and I should get over it. But names carry meaning and memory and emotion. The name Emerson Rose was tied to one of the most painful experiences of my life, and Olivia took it without permission and made it about her joy instead of respecting my grief. Some betrayals cut so deep that they change the entire foundation of a relationship. That story is over. Using your best friend's chosen name for their lost baby shows a level of selfishness that's hard to comprehend. The fact that she acted like it was a coincidence and then got defensive when called out makes it even worse. Some lines shouldn't be crossed, especially when it comes to grief and loss. Our next story shows what happens when someone's living situation becomes a little too convenient to be coincidental. My husband's ex moved in next door. I'm 32 and I've been married to Nathan for 3 years. His relationship with his ex-girlfriend Lauren ended about 5 years ago, and from what Nathan told me, it was a mutual breakup with no hard feelings. They dated for 2 years in their mid-20s but wanted different things long-term. Nathan and I bought our house in a quiet suburban neighbourhood 2 years ago. It's a great area with friendly neighbours and we love the sense of community. Our next-door neighbours were an elderly couple, the Johnsons, who'd lived there for 30 years. They were sweet and quiet, perfect neighbours. Last month, Mrs. Johnson passed away after a long illness, and Mr. Johnson decided to move to Florida to be closer to his daughter. The house went up for sale, and we were curious about who would buy it. The real estate market has been crazy, so we figured it would sell quickly. What we didn't expect was for Lauren to be the one who bought it. Nathan told me that Lauren had made an offer on the house, but he said it like it was just an interesting coincidence. He mentioned that she'd always liked the neighbourhood when they dated, and that she'd been looking to buy her first house for a while. I thought it was a bit odd that, of all the houses in the city, Nathan's ex-girlfriend had chosen to buy the one right next to ours. But Nathan seemed genuinely surprised by it too, so I tried to convince myself it really was just a coincidence. Lauren moved in 3 weeks ago, and since then, I've been noticing some patterns that make me uncomfortable. She seems to have an amazing ability to be outside doing yard work or checking her mail at exactly the same time Nathan leaves for work or comes home. Every morning when Nathan goes out to get the newspaper, Lauren just happens to be watering her plants. When he's working in our garage on weekends, she finds reasons to be in her driveway, organising things, or washing her car. When we're grilling dinner in our backyard, she's suddenly decided it's the perfect time to work in her garden right by our shared fence. At first, Nathan didn't seem to notice the pattern. He'd wave and say hello because he's naturally friendly and they have history together. But I started keeping track, and Lauren has accidentally run into Nathan outside our houses 12 times in 3 weeks. The interactions seem innocent enough on the surface. She'll ask how he's doing, mention something about the neighbourhood, or make small talk about work. But there's something about her body language and the way she looks at him that feels like more than just friendly neighbour conversation. Last weekend, Lauren knocked on our door asking if she could borrow our ladder. She said she needed to change a light bulb in her garage and hadn't bought a ladder yet. Nathan offered to just change the bulb for her, and before I could object, he was heading over to her house with our ladder. He was gone for over an hour. When he came back, I asked what had taken so long for a simple light bulb change. Nathan said Lauren had asked him to look at a few other things while he was there. A squeaky door, a loose cabinet handle, just basic maintenance stuff. I asked why she didn't call a handyman or ask one of the other neighbours for help. Nathan said she'd mentioned that she felt more comfortable asking someone she knew and trusted. The whole thing felt like she was manufacturing reasons to get Nathan alone in her house. 2 days later, Lauren showed up at our door with a plate of cookies, thanking Nathan for his help with the repairs. She stayed and chatted for 20 minutes, mostly talking to Nathan about shared memories from when they dated. She'd bring up restaurants they used to go to, mutual friends they'd had, inside jokes from their relationship. I felt like I was watching someone try to rebuild intimacy through nostalgia. Every "remember when" was an attempt to exclude me from the conversation and remind Nathan of the connection they used to have. That night, I told Nathan I was uncomfortable with how much Lauren was inserting herself into our lives. I explained that the constant coincidental encounters felt orchestrated and that her behaviour seemed like more than just being a friendly neighbour. Nathan said I was reading too much into it. He insisted that Lauren was just being neighbourly and that I was letting jealousy make me paranoid. He pointed out that she'd never said or done anything inappropriate, that all their interactions had been perfectly innocent. But the next week proved my suspicions right. I came home from work early and saw Lauren in our backyard talking to Nathan while he was mowing the lawn. She was wearing a bikini top and shorts, claiming she'd been sunbathing and heard the mower, so she thought she'd come say hi. When she saw me pull into the driveway, Lauren quickly said goodbye and went back to her yard. Nathan seemed flustered and mentioned that she'd just stopped by to ask about the best lawn care service in the area. I pointed out that she'd been dressed for sunbathing, not for a casual conversation about lawn care. Nathan said maybe she'd been working in her garden and had just thrown on whatever was handy, but I'd seen her carefully styled hair and perfect makeup through the window. She'd dressed to get Nathan's attention. The final straw came when I found a note in our mailbox that was clearly meant for Nathan. It was from Lauren thanking him again for all his help and saying she'd love to cook him dinner sometime to return the favour. She'd written her phone number at the bottom and signed it with XOXO. When I showed Nathan the note, he finally seemed to understand that Lauren's behaviour wasn't just friendly. He admitted that some of her comments and actions had made him uncomfortable, but he'd been trying to give her the benefit of the doubt because they'd ended things on good terms. Nathan agreed to set boundaries with Lauren. He told her that while he was happy to be a good neighbour, he wasn't comfortable with the level of personal attention she'd been giving him. He said any future interaction should include me and should be purely neighbourly. Lauren didn't take the boundary setting well. She accused Nathan of being paranoid and said I was clearly the jealous type who couldn't handle her husband having female friends. She claimed she'd just been trying to be a good neighbour and that we were making something innocent into something inappropriate. But her behaviour immediately changed after Nathan's conversation with her. The convenient timing of her outdoor activities stopped. The frequent visits and requests for help ended. The flirty comments and nostalgic conversations disappeared. It's been a month since Nathan set boundaries, and Lauren has been notably cold toward both of us. She avoids eye contact when we're outside at the same time, and hasn't spoken to either of us beyond a basic hello. I think Lauren's reaction proves that her intentions weren't as innocent as she claimed. If she'd really just been trying to be friendly, she would have respected the boundaries and continued being a normal neighbour. Instead, she's basically giving us the silent treatment because Nathan shut down whatever she was trying to accomplish. Living next door to your husband's ex is awkward enough under normal circumstances, but when that ex is clearly trying to rekindle something and using proximity as her strategy, it becomes a constant source of stress and tension. Nathan says he regrets not recognising Lauren's behaviour sooner and wishes he'd set boundaries from the beginning. He's also mentioned that he's curious whether Lauren's decision to buy the house next to ours was really as coincidental as it seemed. Either way, we're stuck with Lauren as our neighbour for the foreseeable future. The situation has definitely made me more aware of how someone can use seemingly innocent interactions to try to rebuild intimacy with an ex-partner. That story is over. Of all the houses in the city, Nathan's ex just happened to buy the one right next door and then started having mysterious yard work needs every time he stepped outside. The bikini-clad lawn care consultation was really the cherry on top of that manipulation sundae. Let's move on to our next story, which shows how some people will fake literally anything for attention and money. My girlfriend tried to fake a pregnancy. I'm 25 and I've been dating Vanessa for about 8 months. Things had been going well between us, though she'd been dropping hints lately about wanting to get more serious and move in together. I wasn't quite ready for that step yet, which I'd told her honestly. About 6 weeks ago, Vanessa started acting different. She'd get emotional over small things, complain about feeling nauseous in the mornings, and mention how tired she was all the time. When I asked if she was feeling okay, she'd just say she wasn't sure what was wrong, but that she'd been feeling off lately. 2 weeks after the symptoms started, Vanessa called me crying and said she needed to tell me something important. She said she'd taken a pregnancy test that morning, and it was positive. She sent me a photo of the test showing 2 pink lines. I was shocked but tried to be supportive. We talked about options and what this would mean for our relationship. Vanessa seemed scared, but also excited, saying maybe this was a sign that we were meant to take things to the next level. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa's pregnancy became the centre of our relationship. She'd research baby names, talk about nursery colours, and send me articles about pregnancy symptoms. She made doctor appointments and would update me afterward about how everything was going well. But something felt off about the whole situation. Vanessa never invited me to any of her appointments, saying her doctor preferred to see new patients alone first. When I offered to pick up prenatal vitamins for her, she said she'd already gotten them, but I never saw her taking any. The turning point came when I was at Vanessa's apartment and needed to throw something away in her bedroom trash can. At the bottom of the bin, underneath some tissues, I found a receipt from a novelty shop. It was for something called fake positive pregnancy tests and was dated 3 days before Vanessa had told me she was pregnant. I confronted her immediately with the receipt. At first she tried to deny it, saying maybe her roommate had bought them as a prank for someone else. But when I pressed her about the timing and asked to see her medical records from her doctor visits, she broke down and admitted everything. Vanessa said she'd been panicking about me not wanting to move forward in our relationship and thought a pregnancy would bring us closer together. She'd bought the fake tests online and had been planning to stage a miscarriage in a few weeks, so she wouldn't have to keep up the lie long term. She swore she loved me and was just scared of losing me. She said she knew know how else it was wrong, but didn't get me to commit to our relationship. She begged me to forgive her and promised she'd never lie about anything again. But the damage was done. For weeks I'd been planning my entire future around a baby that didn't exist. I'd started thinking about marriage, changing careers to make more money, even looking at bigger apartments we could afford together. All of that emotional investment had been based on a complete fabrication. The worst part was realising how calculated the whole thing had been. Vanessa had researched pregnancy symptoms, bought fake tests, and created elaborate stories about doctor visits. She'd manipulated my emotions and our entire relationship for weeks. I broke up with her that day. Some lies are just too big to come back from, especially when they involve faking something as serious as pregnancy to manipulate someone into commitment. That story is over. Faking pregnancy with novelty store tests to trick someone into commitment is manipulation at its absolute worst. The weeks of planning fake doctor visits and researching symptoms shows a level of deception that's genuinely disturbing. Some people will weaponize anything, even the possibility of new life, to get what they want from a relationship. Our next story comes from someone who discovered their living situation was more precarious than they ever imagined. And there we have it, another journey through the absolute chaos that is human relationships. From stolen proposals to fake pregnancies, secret families to cult meetings, tonight's stories remind us that reality really can be stranger than any fiction we could dream up. Whether you're drifting off to sleep or wide awake at 3 a.m, questioning your life choices, at least you know your family drama probably doesn't involve wedding crashes or neighbourhood seances. Thanks for joining me on this wild ride through Reddit's darkest corners, and I'll see you next time for more stories that make you grateful for boring normal problems.